So how does this blog content looks like? Uh, like this. I want this whole content to be created by the large language models. In this video series, I'm gonna show you guys how to create a web application which uses a large language models. And as part of this series, I'm gonna show you the design process and fine tuning of the large language models. Then how do we do an inference of large language models and integrate the large language models into our web application. And as part of this web series, we are gonna create a food blog. So the idea behind is the large language model will create a JSON payload, and that JSON payload gives the instructions on how the food blog should be formatted, and that JSON payload should also give the actual content of the food blog. So without delaying, let's go to the design. So this is a design, a simple design which gives us the overall idea or the basic idea of what we are trying to achieve. So there will be a UI. The UI is based on either React.js or Next.js, and this UI will calls the backend server, and this backend server can be on Spring Boot, Python, Flask, Next.js, or Express.js. And this backend server will fetch the data from the database and returns back the data to the UI. So where exactly the data in the database comes in, that's where our LLM module comes into the picture. This LLM module will take, let's say, the name of the dish, and the LLM runs, creates a JSON payload which has a formatting information, and it which also has the content which needs to be displayed for the food block. The LLM module which gives the payload stores in the database, and that data is being used by the backend server, and in turn this backend server REST APIs are being used by the UI. So that's the idea. So I also created some OpenAI specifications, which gives a little bit idea of how the REST API looks like. So let's say the backend server, which is based on Spring Boot. I'm comfortable with Java Spring Boot. So let's say I'm using a Java Spring Boot and I have published or I'm hosting 4 different APIs. You can host as many APIs as you want, but as a design, I have created 4 APIs. So the first API is which fetches the latest blog post. So whatever the first 10 latest blog posts or whether the 20 latest blog posts, those will be provided by the Spring Boot application to the UI. And these 10 latest blog posts are created by the large language models saved into the Couchbase. The database which I'm preferring here is a Couchbase. I want it to be a NoSQL database. You guys can use any other database like MongoDB, uh, as it's exactly the same, right? Okay, so this API gets uh, fetches the data from the database and gives it to the UI. This is for the latest blog post. Let's see what does this API looks like. So if you see here, right? So the latest blog post, the UI. So let's say there is a homepage UI. As soon as the homepage UI loads, you wanna load or the first part or the first block of the UI is like a carousel or like a slides which shows the latest blog post created. And to have that carousel or the slides, you need to send this data back. So the backend server is responding with this data, where this data, if you see this data, it has a dish name, blog ID, cooking time, published on the day when the blog is created, the image, the path to the image, and what kind of cuisine that dish belongs to. Okay, so this is one endpoint, and then there is another endpoint which gives the data based on the cuisine. So let's say in the UI you have multiple tabs, or a menu which has a different kinds of cuisine, like Indian cuisine, Chinese, Japanese, American, whatever. So whenever you click that button, it should take you to a page which has a list of dishes belonging to that specific cuisine. So this API gives you all the information. If you see here, this API needs the size and page. This is for pagination. So let's say you wanna display only first 100 dishes. So the size is gonna be 100. Or you wanna display first 10 dishes, then it's going to be 10. And it's the actual cuisine name, maybe like Indian, American, Chinese, whatever, right? And you will get the same exact kind of response, which has all the information needed for you to show the viewer, or to show the viewer what kind of dish they want to select, right? Then I have another API which displays the same exact information which starts by letters. Okay, so let's say you have a menu which has A to Z, and whenever someone clicks A, all the dishes belonging, or all the dishes which starts with the letter A needs to be displayed. Okay, so I've been keep saying this will display, right? So how exactly they are displaying? There might be a small card kind of stuff, like you're gonna have multiple cards uh, aligned one by one, or it could be a list, a menu, a table. uh, it could be anything. But the idea here is the UI will call this API, and this API will give a response with this kind of data. If you see, this is an array of an object. So if there are 100 dishes to be displayed on the page one, then you will have 100 objects of these, and it's up to the UI developer how to display those. You want to display as a table, you want to display as a rows, lists, cards, up to you. All right. So once this is done, then there is the actual API which says blog post. And this blog post which will only take one parameter called blog ID. So if you see in this API, you will see that there is something called blog ID, right? So whenever user clicks this dish, so let's say the UI got fetch this data, and each and every object has its own button, and whenever the user clicks the button, then the blog ID gets populated. Blog ID from here gets populated, send it to the backend server, and backend server will fetch the data based on the blog ID, right? So this blog post endpoint is used to retrieve the actual blog content. So how does this blog content looks like? Uh, like this. Okay. So what does it say? So this blog content is having multiple information here, right? So let's see one by one. The type. So the type is, let's say the type could be cuisine, or type could be instructions, or type could be equipment list. So what kind of data we are seeing here is what the type specifies, and the sequence. So in the blog, when you think about the blog page, all the data is displayed in a sequence, right? So the sequence one, any object with the sequence 1 will be on the top, object with the sequence number 2 comes below it, object with sequence 3 comes below the sequence 2. So that's the idea. And if you see here, there is a formatting information which tells us that that particular section, should it be bold, should it be italic, what font size you want font size you want, and what font color you want. So all that information is sent to the UI in this formatting object. Again, this whole content is not being created by the humans. I want this whole content to be created by the large language models. So what I mean is, let's say if I give uh, let me show you this one. So let's say if I give this large language module a dish name called butter chicken. So this large language model should create everything, including the formatting, including the content it should display on the blog post, and save that in the Couchbase. Once it's saved in the Couchbase, the UI and backend server will use this data to display on the UI. Okay. As part of this video series, because this channel is more focused on large language models, I'm going to show you how to come up with the custom data, what is the expected output from the large language models. Then based on the expected output from the large language models, we will create a custom data. Using the custom data, we will fine tune it, and after fine tuning it, we will run the inference, and after running the inference, I will show you how the response will be from large language models, and how do we format that response in a way that we need it to be saved in the database. And after that, we will see, I will give you a demo how that data can be used by the UI. So I'm not going to show you the backend. I'm not actually creating the endpoints. The endpoints which I showed you before is just to give you an idea. We are using large language models to populate some information in the database, and the rest of the things are being the rest of the components are using the data which is in the database, which is created by the large language models, to either display here, or you can do whatever you want based on the use case, right? Let's design this LLM module. So to design this LLM module, we need to first design the prompt which we need to give to the large language model. To design the prompt, we need to understand what we are actually expecting a response from the large language model. So once we know what is the response we are expecting, then we can design the prompt. And once we design the prompt and we know what we are expecting, the response, then we can create a custom data, and using that custom data, we can fine tune the large language model. So let me open VS Code to explain what I am expecting a response from large language model. You can expect different things, but the procedure remains the same. You need to first design your response. Then based on the response, you will design a prompt template. And once you come up with a prompt template, you create a custom data. And using the custom data, you will fine tune your large language model. So this is my design. This is what I'm expecting from the large language model. Let me explain why I'm expecting this one. So the first one, the first object, if you see, it has a type title, which is a title of the blog post, and the sequence tells whether it should come the first of the blog page. If it says sequence 2, then any object which has sequence 2 will come below the sequence number 1 object. So this sequence is just to put the content in a sequence. And then you see a text. So this text refers to the actual text to be displayed on the blog post. And then I have a formatting object which actually tells how this text needs to be formatted. So when I come up with my version of blog post, I came up with 7 sequences, 7 different objects, right? Let me show you what are those objects. One is the title, the dish name goes here, then the cuisine. What cuisine does this dish belongs to, and the formatting. Then the preparation time says 15 minutes, 1 hour, 10 hours, doesn't matter, right? But still there is a formatting for this. And then there is a cooking time, equipment list, ingredient list, instructions, right? So now I know what response I am expecting from the large language model. So how do I design the prompt which actually creates this response? We will use ChatGPT to create a prompt template. I'm in the ChatGPT now, so let me ask ChatGPT a basic question, right? So this is my base prompt template. This is not my final, but based on what the ChatGPT responds, I have to fine tune the prompt until I get a response which is similar to what I expected. So if you see here, my prompt is you are helpful assistant whose role is to create posts for the food blog. I will give you the dish name and you will provide the block data in JSON format. And now I'm explaining how the format should look like. The JSON format is, if you see here, I'm giving a title, sequence 1, and I'm giving a formatting object an empty object. And then sequence number 2, formatting object as an empty object. So I have provided all the necessary objects needed. If you see your ingredients list and instructions. Then what I did is I explained ChatGPT what each object should look like. So I was saying that the ingredients list is an array of text. The instructions are also array of text. The elements of the instruction array represents the steps in ascending order. The elements of the instructions arrays, which means whatever the instructions provided in the array, they are in ascending order, they are in a sorted order. I'm just explaining ChatGPT, and I'm also explaining that each object of the JSON will have formatting object. That is where I was referring about this. I'm just explaining ChatGPT that how the response should look like. So each object of the JSON array will have formatting object with the schema, the same exact schema which I have created here. I have added here, and I also explained the ChatGPT that how does the formatting should look like for equipment list. Let's say I also explained how the formatting should look like for, let's say, ingredients list, instructions. So I gave specific instruction that how does the instruction should look like, how does the equipment should look like, all these objects. So when I gave this prompt, I got this response. If you see here, it looks good. Everything looks good. Everything looks as expected. So I played with the different versions of the prompt. If you see here, I changed the wording a little bit here and there. I have provided the name of the dish is chili chicken here, and then I have provided the name of the dish is something else. So I'm just changing the dish name. I'm trying to figure out whether ChatGPT is able to provide the right response. So I did this. I did like 3 times. Actually, I did a lot of playing to come up with this prompt, to come up with the exact wording. There were some situations where the ChatGPT was not giving the array of text here, or somewhere in the instructions. It's not giving array of text. Sometimes it is not giving the formatting. So I had to change the wording here. So it took me a while for me to figure out the prompt, but in the end, I figured out that this prompt is good for me, for my use case. So let me explain more about this prompt. So my idea is whatever the formatting I give here, let's say I said that the type title should have the following values. I'm saying that the format object of the type title should have the following values. So my idea is whatever the values I provided in the prompt, I want that to be part of here in the response. And the reason is tomorrow if I want to change the look and feel of my blog post, I can just change the prompt, and the large language model will provide the response in this format. And when I checked everything checks out. Whatever I provided here is here. Let's say if I take this prompt and if I only change the dish name, uh, and try to generate multiple responses. So what I mean is, so while fine tuning a large language model, we need a custom data, right? So to create a custom data, I need to replace this dish name with whatever the dish I want, and I will get the response from the chat GPT, right? So my idea is not just to change the name of the dish. My idea is also to change the formatting object as part of the fine tuning, so that, like I explained before, going forward, my blog post formatting should be able to change based on this prompt. Okay, so now the idea here is I should be able to change the look and feel of my blog just by changing the formatting object for that specific section in the prompt, right? So tomorrow I want to change the font color of the type title. I don't know what this color represent, but let's say this is red and tomorrow I want to change it to blue. So I should be able to give the hex value of the specific color, and the response should have that color as part of the type title. So now if I take this prompt and try to train my large language model, it may not work because I cannot train the large language model with the same values as here, right? So let's say I have generated 400 different responses for the 400 different dishes just by changing the dish name here but keeping everything the same. Maybe the large language model will not give the response as expected because the training data will always have the format object the same, right? So somehow I need to figure out that the training data, the custom training data which I am trying to generate, should not only vary in the dish name, it also should vary in the format object. It could be random one, but as long as whatever we are giving here, and if we provide the same thing in the response during the training, then the large language model will understand that, okay, so for the title, whatever the format provided here should be present in the response in the JSON object. We have covered the design part of our web application. So we have designed the UI, we have designed, or we know how the backend should look like, all the APIs, we know the prompt template, and we also know how the response should be, and we also know that this response, whatever the LLM module is generating, will be saved in the database, and we know that backend will fetches the data from the database, gives it back to the UI, and the UI will display the data according to the format which is specified in the response. So before I end, let me show how the whole thing looks like on the UI. Created a sample component using Next.js, and Next.js takes the JSON data here, right? So let's say right now I'm just mocking the data, but let's say this data is coming from our backend, right? Because this backend will actually gets the data from the DB, and this DB gets the data from the large language model. So effectively, the UI is getting the data which is created by the large language model. So let's say this line is calling the backend and getting the data from the database, and this is the data, right? And there's another component which actually applies all the formatting rules. If you see here, there is an apply formatting method which I created. So it applies all the formatting rules to format the content of the blog page. So let me show you what I mean. If you see here, so this data or the whole thing is coming from this one, and this is one of the response provided by the chat GPT, right? So when I copied this one, so let's say I copy this one and paste it here, right? And rerun this, rerun my thing, and if you see here, it changed. And the whole thing, not only just the content is changed, but if you see here, the way it looks same is different. The font size is different, the font color is different, and everything is provided by the large language model. In this case, it is provided by the chat GPT, but our ultimate goal is to fine tune our large language model, and our large language model should able to create this kind of data.